And so today we're going to have the conversation with our Sister Sharon Park. And Sharon resides presently at the Adrian Dominican Sisters Mother House here in Adrian, Michigan. But she has much to tell us about how she got here and where she came from in the Pacific Northwest. So I invite you, Sharon, to tell us a little bit more or a lot more about who you are and where you began up there in Tacoma, briefly. Briefly, you were in Tacoma, and then go on and share your story with us.
Thanks, Peg. I was born in Tacoma, Washington, which is about 30 miles south of Seattle. But I have no knowledge of that because at 3 months, my family moved to Seattle. And so most of my life, all except for a couple of years of education that I had outside of that, I have always been in the Archdiocese of Seattle and primarily in the Seattle area. So I was raised I'm the eldest of my family, and my mother and father, my father is a native Washingtonian, and generations, all the generations are in that area. For my grandparents are there and my great grandparents moved there. So it's been a long time in the Pacific Northwest. I have a sister who's just younger than I am, just 15 months younger, and we were always together. We shared everything. We shared a room all our lives. So I was very close to her. She just died just in 21. And then I had a brother who's also just a couple of years younger. And so the three of us grew up together. And then all of a sudden we got a baby sister, and she's 11 years younger than I am. So we were thrilled. At least I was. He wanted a boy, but my sister and I both wanted girls, and we won. So we have three girls and one boy. My mother was originally from Iowa, which didn't mean too much to us, except that we went to visit my grandparents and we had to go through a lot of flat land. And Seattle is, as some of you know, is hills. We basically live on hills. So that's a real difference in terms of geography. I've only been here in Adrian just a few months. So I'm getting to learn that there are not mountains and water immediately around me. And as you can see from my background, mountains and water are what we could see out our window. And people could hardly believe that people have that kind of view, but we do. And certainly at the convent that I left when I came here, that was the view we had on one side. And the other side, we still had another mountain range and we had water. So I said, I gave all of that up for cornfields, and I'm still trying to figure out if that was a good deal or not. So I'm working on that.
We're going to get you up northern Michigan. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that would be a real privilege. And I've heard really good things. So I'm hoping to get there. So then we lived most of our life, actually the four of us all grew up in Seattle. My father and all the rest of my siblings were born in the same hospital. The part that was probably most interesting for us is that we moved a lot. We moved always in Seattle, and sometimes to be in the same parish that we had been in. So I went to school at Lady of the Lake School, taught by the Tacoma Dominicans for a few years, and then moved to Christ the King, where my mother also was a teacher and my father was an usher for years. So we always, our religion and our faith was always very close to us, but not without humor. My father always said, you can joke about anything as long as you're respectful. So we have a pretty good sense of humor. That's my opinion, is that we have a pretty good sense of humor. Not everybody has the same sense of humor. And I just thought they didn't have a sense of humor, but now I found out they have one. It's just not mine. So, but I already figured out that God has my sense of humor, so that's okay. I'm sure that everybody has the same. So pretty much just went through grade school, and then the high school was different. It was a brand new high school. And this is the first thing I heard about numerous religious communities. We had either 9 or 11 different communities. So we got to meet a lot of sisters, got to recognize a lot of different habits. Probably the major piece for me in terms of a religious vocation was when I was in first grade. And I remember this clearly. Sister said, how many of you want to be priests or sisters? And so I raised my hand. No questions were raised. I can't remember anything else about that. I just remember raising my hand. And as I tell my story, I don't think I ever took my hand down. I don't recall ever wanting to be anything else, just a sister. I have no idea even why I said that. I just know that happened. And when people would ask me all the rest of my life what I wanted to be, I said I wanted to be a sister. So it's interesting that that's a no knowledge of how that came about. It's just what it was. And I think once I kept saying that, everyone expected that I was going to enter the convent. So I don't think it was a surprise to anybody, and certainly not to me. So I think that's
even to your family. Your family.
My family was fine and didn't ever
Yeah.
think anything about it. My sister also entered the convent, and my brother went into the seminary. So I don't think anybody was too surprised. I don't, maybe with my brother, they might have been a little more surprised, but not with my sister and me. Although I'm different, I'm a strong introvert, which nobody ever believes, except those who really know me. But and maybe because of other people I tell. But my family was a pretty extroverted. My mother was a teacher and didn't have any problems meeting with people and talking about that. And we, because I was older in the grade school when she was teaching, we got to correct the papers, and we'd always say, this one's an A, and if they give you a good present, then they can keep their A. We used to tease all the time about how good the presents were at Christmas, and then we would grade them accordingly. So it was always fun. And my father was a salesperson, and was also, for many years of my life, was a traveling salesperson. So Mitch missed many of our adventures, especially during the summer. He was gone because he had covered 4 different states. And we're talking Washington and Oregon, Idaho and Montana. So we're not talking that it was anything close to us.
Right.
So pretty much that was my grade school and raising. And so then obviously entered the convent. My sister had entered ahead of me. I actually worked in as a surgical technician in the hospital. Our next door neighbor had worked in the hospital and said, well, if you want a job, we can get you one there. So
they trained you. They trained you for that.
No, actually, yeah, they did. And you know what was happened was they trained you. First of all, I worked in central supply, and then they had an opening as a surgical technician, and it was really on the job training. You just went in and they said, you do this, do that. So basically we were the people who handed the instruments to the doctor. I remember one doctor said to me, he asked for he asked for his scissors, and I pressed the hemostat into his hand, and he said, well, that's what I like, a nurse who hands me what I want, not what I ask for. So fortunately, we got along really well.
Oh God, that was good.
So when I was not an RN, then I entered, and first, one of the things, I had never thought about being a nurse. I always wanted to be a teacher. And actually, I thought I was a pretty good, because I had, taught CCD and those things, even as I was growing up. So when they asked all of us if we wanted to go into teaching or nursing, because those were basically the options, we had 2 hospitals, 2 small town hospitals. And so when they asked me what I wanted, I said, nursing. But I just wondered where that came from, because I thought, whoa, I had no thought that I was going to be going into nursing. And nobody in our family was nursing. Nobody did nursing, and we never even talked about becoming nurses. But it has served me really well. I am so glad I got that body of knowledge and was able to do that. It's a great, great ministry. Mm-hmm. So I liked that. I also got to teach nursing for a little bit, and that was fun too. So I got to do a little bit of both. Just for a short while. I taught in the community college. I taught LPNs. Wow. So I enjoyed that. But my other nursing experiences, after I had got my RN, I worked in our hospital for a couple of years, and it was right in the 60s, right after Vatican II. So the people said that the young sisters, because obviously we were in our 20s at the time, the young sisters said, well, if you stay far away from Seattle, all the action's happening in Seattle. And, and I was by myself, and they said, you better come back to Seattle. So I thought, well, maybe I should. So I called up the University of Washington Hospital and said, I'm a nurse and I would, like to have a job. They said, fine. I didn't even have an interview. I didn't have anything. So I figured they were pretty desperate. And I had some years of experience. So that also, at least
don't underestimate the power of the Spirit. Right?
Exactly. For me, that's always been it. And as I was telling Peg, that was the name I chose. My name was Sister John Marian, and my sister was Sister John Marie. And my father had said to both of us, I don't care what name you take as long as it's mine. So we got John. And I took Marian because my mother's mother's name was Marian. So at least I tried to be fair to both of them. And so that was my name. And then my title was of the Holy Spirit. And I've always enjoyed that. If I had a title again, that was a title I would still take. So that's.
And your sister is deceased at this time?
She is deceased.
But
She
stayed
left
in.
after 11 years,
Okay.
and she got married and had 2 grandchildren.
Oh, okay. So you're an aunt,
Right,
nieces and nephews. Okay.
right.
Okay.
So so that's basically, and then so I worked in a large city hospital at the University of Washington, and then decided that I wanted to do something else, and I went and applied for public health department. And the public health department, we did visiting nurse at that time. So we visited, and primarily senior citizens, but other people too, but primarily senior citizens in their homes. A great effort in Washington State was to keep people in their homes.
Wonderful.
So we were part of that ministry. And then we broke off and became a visiting nurse service. So I worked as visiting nurse for a long time. I met some interesting people, but the thing I learned about that is the nursing part, you're really in charge when you're in the hospital or a clinic or something. And the great difference about home nursing was you're in their home. You're actually a guest in their home.
Wonderful.
Yes, you're the professional, but you're also, I used to teach the people who were under me in terms of on my team in terms of the nursing part is, first of all, call them Mr. or Mrs. because that's and at that time, that was what they were known for. Don't call them by their first name, although that was becoming the common thing. And the young people they even call their parents sometimes by their first name. So I said, that will be disrespectful to them. So if you want to have the respect that you need, that, and they'll recognize you as a professional, then you have to call them Mr. or Mrs. And they did. And that worked really well for us because we would get complaints when they did about who they were. So we wanted to make sure that happened. So I had a lot of learning during that time in terms of who people are and how to treat people. Mm-hmm. And then one of the stories that I particularly like is one of the people I visited, probably in her mid 80s. And of course, I'm in my 20s, so I think that's really old. Now I think it's not too bad at all. So she had her husband divorced her on their golden jubilee, so I thought that was not the best thing.
Oh my!
And her son had died in his 30s. So when I left, I really enjoyed her. And when I left the visiting nurse and went into my next ministry, I don't know how. And this is the work of the Spirit again. I don't know how I stayed with her, but she didn't have anybody. So I came to her place, made sure she had the things that she needed. Mm-hmm. And I would, come on Saturdays because I was working during the week. I'd come on Saturdays and fix her things, get things ready, do her checks and stuff. And one time she said to me, I appreciate all that you do, but she said, I would really appreciate it if you'd just sit down and talk to me. Wonderful. And I thought, oh my goodness. I was just I was just active. I just wanted to get the things done. And it was a huge learning for me. The other learning that she gave me was when she was dying, and I was working at the Catholic Conference, which I'll say a little bit more about in a minute. The phone call came down to me, and I had gotten her into a nursing home. She would not go into the nursing home until they called me in Olympia, where I was working at the state capitol, and they said, we need to send her to the nursing home and she doesn't want to go. So I talked with her and said, what are you, I said, what are they're thinking? I said, you have to be able to walk. You have to be able to get around. All right. She says, you tell them to get me up. I'm going to go home. So I said, all right. And then she said to me one day when she had gone back home, she said, it's time for me to go to the nursing home. So I arranged all of that and got that done. So when she was in the nursing home, I was in a meeting with the bishops of the state, and we were having a board meeting, and I got a call saying she was dying. So I said, please tell her that I can't leave right this moment, but I will be to the nursing home, and the nursing home was very close. I said, I'll be up there as soon as I can. And while I finished giving my report to the bishops, she died. That was a huge learning to me, to say some things are not so important. The bishops would not have cared if I had left and said, I really have to go. This is an emergency and I need to leave. They wouldn't have said a thing to me. Mm-hmm. It was my own ability to say, well, see how I have to give this report. I find out you have to really figure out things in life. And when you're in your 30s, sometimes it takes you a little bit longer to figure that part out. But both of those learnings from her were wonderful things in terms of future life. I just figured out you got to take the time to figure out if this is really important, if this is for you, or if you're thinking of the other person. So I appreciated that part. So I stayed there in that nursing position for a long time. Then I was working with the sisters of the Archdiocese and the Sisters Council. And there was a group of us that met for 3 years, and we met every single week. And basically we just did 1 week we would spend going to visit and seeing the activities that were going on. We spent 1 week just reading and learning about what's going on, talking with each other. We spent another week, and we always met on Wednesdays, spent another week visiting places. We visited the state capitol, we visited Night Court, we visited the jail, and we did all sorts. We just visited different places, saw different areas of injustice. And then at the end of that time, we decided we had to do something about all this, but we didn't know very much. So, and Justice in the World was just coming out, and Justice in the World was a Bishops' Conference document. And we said, and it had a part in there that said that the part of working in the society and for the society was a constitutive part of the preaching of the gospel. We all knew that quote really well. So we said, we need to do something. Well, I didn't want to particularly give up my job. I really liked my job, and the rest of them were teachers. So we said, but we probably just need to go and find out. So we went to Network at that time. It had just started.
Okay.
70s. And so we met Carol Costin, and we said, well, we want to do something, but Washington, D.C. is too far away, and everybody just thinks everything happens in Washington. Whenever you see Washington, it means D.C. It doesn't mean Washington State. So we said, we're going to stay around here. So each of us thought I really wasn't going to do it. And then for some reason, the Spirit again moved, and that one of the people dropped out, and we said we had to choose somebody. I have no idea about how I ever got chosen, because as an introvert, it wasn't my idea to go into politics. So, but they said, why don't you go ahead and do it? So I thought, okay. So I went ahead and, but we didn't have permission to quit our ministries at that time. So my community, when I went and said, can I have some time off, a few months off, so I could go to Olympia and just find out if this was something that we would want to do or not? They said no. And they said, because that's not a ministry of our community. And so I said, well, you know what I said at our last chapter? And then I pulled out the quote that had said that we needed to be involved in justice issues. And I said, this fits right in with what we just said. So they said, oh yeah, okay. Then, and so they gave me permission to spend a few months in Olympia and then seeing if that would work out or not. So the other sister and I who went, she was a St. Joseph sister. We went and just got to live in these people's house because they wanted to have somebody in their house for the 6 months that they were going to be traveling. So we got rent-free in a house. And we just went every day to the state capitol. Every day we went, and we just sat in hearings. We just looked at the calendar and said what we thought was interesting, and went around and visited, talked with different people about what this all was entailed. We were not lobbyists. In a minute, I'll explain that we were later, but not at that time. And at the same time, the Catholic Conference was just starting. Across the United States, Catholic conferences were just formed. Mm-hmm. So we saw that the Catholic Conference was formed, and we knew what they were. Catholic conferences, this is the standard line whenever you talk about the Catholic conferences, it represents the bishops of your state in areas of public policy. Okay. So on both the national and the local level. Most Catholic conferences are in whatever the state capital is. And not always, but most often. Ours was not, because the first director of the Catholic Conference, a priest, lived on a houseboat, and so he wanted to stay on his houseboat, and so that had to be in Seattle. So nevertheless, our Catholic Conference started in Seattle, and that's also where the Archbishop was. So that seemed logical in terms of that. So we did that. Then we talked to them with Archbishop saying, you might be interested. We're doing, we're working in Olympia and working on public policy, and we might be interested in hiring us for the Catholic Conference. And he said, well, he had already hired a director, but maybe we could be the secretary. And we said, that wasn't exactly what we had in mind. No. So, and I don't think he was trying to insult us. He was just trying to find a job for us. And we said, no, we're not really looking for that. So we went and talked to the director, and he actually never went to Olympia. The other sister and I stayed in Olympia. I stayed with the Benedictine sisters and then was home on the weekends. So we both went to Olympia every single day. In the state of Washington, if you're going to lobby, you have to, and you get paid for it, you have to be a registered lobbyist. We have a very strict lobbying regulations. You have to report every single penny and where you spend it, what legislators you give it to, and all of that. So we were both lobbyists, although I know for most people that's a bad term, but nevertheless. And I always say, if you don't have your lobbyist, you really don't know what the issues are, and you might really lose on that. So we lobbied then on behalf of charities. So we had a huge agenda. And everybody I ever met, I said, nobody in their right mind would carry the agenda we carried. So we carried our criminal justice issue, all of those issues, because every diocese has prison ministry. So we did their issues. We certainly did the tax issues that were touching us. We did, and some issues that directly we touched, certainly the senior citizens, a lot of issues in terms of nursing homes and in terms of all of the other services that they needed. We built up a huge agenda with that. So that was really wonderful.
That's great.
And we did a lot of poverty issues. And then we did prison ministry. The other sister and I visited every prison in the state. And that was also an experience. And at one point, one of the state legislators called us, a state senator called us and said, could you get the bishops to go to Walla Walla, which is where the state prison was, and there was a riot. And it was during the summer, and so they were in lockdown, and it was boiling hot. So we said, well, our director took the month of July off, and this was in July, and he was out on a boat, and so you could not get him except to ship to shore, and he didn't want to be disturbed. So the two of us we called up the bishop and said they need somebody to go to Walla Walla, which is in eastern Washington and quite a ways from us. Would you be willing to go? And we found one of the bishops who was around and said, yes, I'll go. So we flew to Walla Walla and visited with the bishops. And it was a real experience because we were the only women in an all-male prison, and they had been locked down. So, we heard all sorts of language that we probably wouldn't have heard otherwise. So it was a real experience going there. We also visited all the women's prisons too. So it was just a real learning experience and everything. But what I want to tell about is we were in Olympia. We have a 105-day session on the odd numbered years and 60-day session on the even numbered years by law. We can go into special session, which we did often. So we decided that what we needed to do was just pick an agenda and start working on some of the issues. In the very beginning, before we were lobbyists, we actually worked on one issue that helped the sisters of the state. And that was, we worked on a piece of legislation that was called Convents Are Not Nursing Homes. Because we had a law in the state of Washington that said if 5 people unrelated lived together and got care, they needed to have all the regulations of a nursing home. Oh. And obviously convents had more than 5 people living together, and we certainly did have care services at that time. So we had them, we got that law passed that said convents were not nursing homes. It worked out really well because as longer we lived, the more we needed that law, because more sisters were living together. So that was a great thing. The other piece that we did a lot of, go ahead.
No, I'm just saying, Sharon, we've only got a few minutes left. And I think we should also just do an extra special session on you with your experience. It's awesome. You've just touched on teaching and nursing and politics and all of that. It's just unbelievable. And you certainly have a passion. You had a passion. I think you still do for all of those areas. And I know you've got a lot to share, but just one more small story that you want to share the most with us about your ministry with the prisoners or whatever. Yeah.
I think I'll do a piece of legislation that we're still known for today. And that was a piece of legislation for people on welfare. So what we had done is we provided in the state of Washington, provided what we call chore workers so that people could, so senior citizens primarily, but for anybody disabled to be able to stay in their homes. And then in one of our budget cutting eras, we cut the chore services. So one of the lobbyists who had been there for 20 years said to me one day, he said, I think we should set up a volunteer chore services. So because they cut the program out. And so that left people, the only option they really had were nursing homes. So I said, there's only one entity in the state of Washington that you could have volunteers all over the state. And he said, what is that? I said, the Catholic Church. I said, that's the only group, but we have parishes. And I said that we could do that working through Catholic Charities. And so we set up 25 years ago, almost 30 years ago now, we set up volunteer chore services. Now, people say, well, if it's volunteer, why did it cost money? Because you have to have a program people to be the volunteers. Right. So every year, and we didn't put it in the budget because when they saw a volunteer program, nobody wanted to fund it. But then we were smart enough to have our volunteers and the recipients go to the media constantly. And so all those and we had them writing legislators and brought legislators in for awards and things like that. Legislators all knew that. We never had, in all the years I was there, that program, we had to stick in the budget at the last minute for all those years, and we never had it cut. We only got it increased. So we had millions of dollars into a program like that. So that's one of the programs that we did that I'm really pleased with, because I know that it was because of the Catholic Church that we got there. So people can complain about the Catholic Church, but you can also use the power and
that chore thing is evident in parishes, all denominations, right? And how important that is, because particularly as everyone is, aging and trying to age in place. But anyway, they do need assistance, not only the chores, but as you said earlier, they need someone to sit down and say, Mrs. So-and-so, how are you doing? Yeah, because they have, many challenges. Just a couple other things. You certainly have been involved in the missions of lots of areas. What do you do for fun?
Well, I'm a great sports fan. Really,
that's right. Your sports. That's right.
I really do enjoy sports. It's interesting. Sister Seal, who's right next to me now in her room right next to me, she and I went to grade school together. So we actually played against each other in grade school and then with each other in high school. And then we entered the community, and then we just keep in touch with those sports all the time. So that part's nice to be able to have people that also agree, because not everybody is supporting the Seattle Seahawks or the Seattle Mariners. I have to tell you, some of the people in Adrian actually support other teams.
Oh, of course. A lot of them are Chicago. We're trying to be faithful to our Detroit Lions and Detroit Tigers. Yeah, it is. But it's a nice rivalry thing. Is there anything else? What's your favorite scripture? What speaks to you? I know you're very obvious that you listen to the Spirit within you, but
the part that I always have thought about is not a direct from scripture, but it's create a new heart in me, oh God. That's something I always think daily, and that's really the Spirit who has to work through me to be able to do some of the things. When I try to list the things I'd like to be known for, which I actually don't think other people would know me for, which I think is really sad. So it means I'm not using all the gifts that I might be able to have.
God, yes, you are.
So I always think that it's the work of the Spirit that some of the things, I'm always amazed every day, or actually often amazed how things work out. And they're just happens. And not because I'm great and wonderful and knew something. It's because of all the people around me. I mean, I have been so gifted with all of that. I'm just grateful for all of that, because being an introvert, I'm pretty much, I don't mind being
I think you should wipe that word introvert out of your vocabulary.
I told you before, I'm just an articulate introvert because my parents taught me public speaking, and we had to do public speaking before a mirror. So, I mean, we are all public speakers.
But it's the work of the Holy Spirit, and you listen. So
hopefully,
cut that introvert word out for sure. Because the Spirit, the Spirit certainly is in touch with you, and you've listened and you have responded. And it's but you have that was a good question I could be asking people. What would you like to be known for? I guess that's our legacy, Well,
I certainly want to be known for my sense of humor.
Good.
because I love to make people laugh and have that. I think that's enjoyable. So I think they like that. I'd also like to be known that I'm generous with my time, that when people ask me to do things, I'm willing to do that. I'm willing to be helpful if I can. I don't have a lot of external gifts. I mean, I'm not an artist or any of those kinds of things. Mostly what I have is mostly working with my humor, and being around people. I'd like to be known as a good listener, and something that people could, that I'd be approachable, those types of things. Mm-hmm. But those would have to be works of the Spirit for sure, because being a strong introvert, which no one wants to know about.
I don't think you could convince anyone that you're an introvert.
I don't. It's hard for people to believe it.
So your life has really been in out west. And to come to this area, which has its own beauty, and you'll find it in time, and to adjust, as you have said previously, to a new culture. Definitely, we operate differently than people do in the other parts of our state, et cetera, et cetera. But You seem to be open. You seem to be energized. I never would have guessed all the grief you've been through in the last few years with the losses, and then most recently with your move here from that beautiful state, that beautiful scene behind you. So any last words you want to leave with us?
I just want people to know how much I've appreciated all that people have given to me and in terms of themselves, but in terms of, just being gracious. I mean, that same woman I told you about before, she would always say to me how much she appreciated me. And all I could say was, you have no idea how much it is to be able to give and to have you receive it so graciously. That's a huge gift.
That's very good. That's very good. Even for us personally to know, to be gracious and receiving the help, because we always want to be in charge and be the one doing it.
Exactly.
But to sit back when I need it, or to ask for it when I need it. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah, that's for sure. Well, any last words to me?
No, I just want to thank you. It's actually, with all the time that we've taken to try to get to this point, I've enjoyed it.
That's
and
right.
it's fun listening to sisters' stories. That's the one thing I said to you before. It's been great being here, even though I've only been here for a few months, because no one knows me and I can be anybody I want to, and they don't know that or not. But I also get to know them as they are now, and I get to hear their stories. I go to all those remembrances because I want to hear who the people are that just died.
Yeah, that's right.
And I'm really impressed. I think, oh my goodness, I'm nothing compared to all the things that everyone has done. It's pretty nice.
Right. Well, you are. Now, some people are going to be deciding not to do their story if they haven't done, because they listen to your story and all that you've been about. But we've all been called to respond to the gospel in a different way. And our mission is different. And we bring ourselves to our mission. So anyway, stop my preaching. So I want to just thank you again and again. And we know we have a secret about this taping, so it makes it extra special. You have been wonderful to work with, and I thank you for that, and the way you've handled this whole experience. And I know you've been a profound gift to all the people that you have touched in your life of many, 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 many years. I think as we reach over to that next decade, we look at things differently. But anyway, thank you, and God bless you so much. And keep listening to the Spirit, because she's not finished with you yet.
Thank you, Peg. And you've been gracious, very gracious, and fun to work with. Thank you.